June 2nd, 2026 was not just another Russian strike on Ukraine. It was the single most devastating, most coordinated, most technologically terrifying aerial bombardment Russia has ever unleashed in over 4 years of full-scale war. And if you are only now hearing about it, you need to understand every single detail of what took place, because this attack does not just represent a military escalation, it represents a strategic statement from Vladimir Putin that he is willing to burn every city in Ukraine to the ground rather than accept defeat on a battlefield where, by every objective measure, his armies are failing, his economy is cracking, and his generals are running out of options. And so tonight we are going to break down exactly what happened, exactly what weapons Russia used, exactly what the human cost was, and exactly what this means for the future of this war. Because this is the moment everything changes. On the night of June 2nd, 2026, Russia launched 73 missiles and 656 drones in a single overnight barrage against Ukraine, including 8 Zircon hypersonic missiles and 33 ballistic missiles, with the main strike direction pointed squarely at the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv, while simultaneously targeting Dnipro, Kharkiv, Zaporizhzhia, Poltava, and other regions across the country. Let that number sink in for a moment. 729 total aerial weapons launched in a single night, a number so staggering that even seasoned military analysts were left struggling to find the right words to describe it, and the sheer logistics of coordinating that many weapons across that many trajectories from that many launch platforms, including air, sea, and land-based systems, represents a level of operational planning that Russia has been quietly preparing for weeks, even as diplomats in various European capitals were whispering about ceasefire possibilities. Even as peace negotiations were supposedly gaining momentum, Putin was moving missiles into position and counting drones in warehouses, waiting for the right moment to send a message so loud and so brutal that the entire world would have no choice but to listen. The attack included 8 Zircon hypersonic missiles, which an Air Force spokesman confirmed was likely the largest number of those specific missiles Russia has ever deployed in a single strike during the entire war. The Zircon travels at 9 times the speed of sound and has a range of 1,000 kilometers, making it one of the most difficult projectiles on Earth to intercept with conventional air defense systems. Think about what that means in practical terms. A missile traveling at Mach 9 gives air defense operators a reaction window measured not in minutes but in seconds. And when you are firing 8 of those simultaneously alongside 33 ballistic missiles and 656 drones, you are not just overwhelming Ukrainian defenses, you are deliberately engineering a scenario in which some of those weapons will always get through, no matter how skilled the defenders, no matter how sophisticated the air defense network, because the mathematics of saturation attacks are ruthless and indifferent to heroism, and Russia knows this, and Russia has been refining this tactic for years. Ukrainian air defense forces performed extraordinary work, destroying and suppressing 40 of the 73 missiles and 602 of the 656 drones launched, but hits from 30 ballistic missiles, 3 cruise missiles, and 33 drones were recorded at least 38 locations across the country, with debris from destroyed drones falling on an additional 15 locations. So even with one of the most battle-hardened and combat-experienced air defense networks on the planet, a network that has been learning and adapting and improving every single night for 4 years, Russia still managed to punch through at 38 confirmed locations, which tells you something critically important about the nature of this conflict. Ukraine is not losing this war. Ukraine is not collapsing. Ukraine's military is not broken, but Ukraine is being systematically bled by an enemy that has decided to turn its entire industrial base toward the singular goal of producing more weapons faster than Ukraine can shoot them down, and unless that calculus changes, these nights will keep happening. Russia's defense ministry stated in a Telegram post that its forces launched a massive strike using high-precision long-range air, land, and sea-based weapons, including hypersonic aeroballistic missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles, targeting what Moscow described as military industrial, fuel, and transport facilities and military bases across the Kyiv, Zaporizhzhia, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Poltava, Khmelnytsky, and Sumy regions, claiming that all designated targets had been struck. That is the Russian government's version of events, and it's worth understanding what that language actually means. When Moscow says military-industrial targets, what they mean in practice is apartment buildings in residential neighborhoods, clinics treating sick patients, cars parked in the street, garages housing civilian vehicles, and the kind of infrastructure that ordinary people depend on to heat their homes, cook their food, and keep the lights on. And the evidence from the ground on the morning of June 2, 2026, makes the reality unmistakably clear. In the southern industrial city of Dnipro, at least 9 people were killed, including 1 child, when a 4-story apartment building collapsed entirely under the force of the strike, with rescuers spending hours pulling bodies and survivors from the rubble. 1 child dead in Dnipro because Vladimir Putin decided that the political optics of launching 656 drones in a single night outweighed whatever diplomatic goodwill might have been accumulated in the weeks prior. That is the moral reality of this attack, stripped of all the language about military targets and precision weapons, and it's a moral reality that should be stated clearly and without equivocation every single time Russia fires another ballistic missile at a city full of sleeping civilians. Across the country, at least 11 to 17 people were confirmed killed and more than 100 others injured, with the brunt of the attack falling on Kyiv and Dnipro, and officials noted that Russia's escalated bombing campaign comes at a moment when its battlefield gains have stalled and a diplomatic impasse has emerged. Ukrainian Interior Minister Igor Klimenko confirmed that the most significant destruction was concentrated in the Kyiv, Dnipro, and Kharkiv regions, with fires burning across multiple districts as first responders scrambled to reach the wounded. Now let's talk about Kyiv specifically, because Kyiv was the primary target of this attack, and what happened in the Ukrainian capital overnight on June 2, 2026 was not just a military operation, it was a terror campaign designed to break the psychological will of a people who have now been living under the constant threat of death from above for more than 4 years, and who have somehow, impossibly, defiantly refused to break. In Kyiv, Mayor Vitaly Klitschko reported that 4 people were killed and at least 58 others were wounded, including 2 children, in what he described as a mass enemy attack on the capital, with residents describing scenes of apocalyptic chaos, smoke filling the streets, windows blown out across entire city blocks, and the sound of explosions rolling through the night like thunder that never stopped. One survivor, 65-year-old Olena Dniproskaya, described being in her apartment in Kyiv's Podolsky district when the blast hit. She said she went into the corridor with her phone, and before she could understand what was happening, everything fell on her head, the glass shattered and the door was blown off its hinges, and when the dust settled, her apartment was completely destroyed. No doors, no windows, no balcony, nothing left of the home she had lived in. Olena Dniproskaya is 65 years old, and she now has nowhere to live, and she is one of hundreds of Ukrainians who woke up on June 2, 2026, to find that their world had been physically destroyed, not by any decision they made, not by any act they committed, but simply because they live in Ukraine, and Russia decided this was the night to send 729 weapons into the sky. In Kharkiv, at least 14 people were injured, and residential homes, garages, and cars were damaged, with a 2-story residential building and part of a 4-story apartment block hit, people trapped beneath the larger structure, and the boom of explosions echoing through most of the night and into the early morning hours as the attack continued in waves. And this is the part of these attacks that the casualty numbers alone never fully capture. The attack did not happen in a single moment, it came in
waves, wave after wave of drones and missiles throughout the entire night, meaning that for 8, 9, 10 hours, the people of Kyiv and Kharkiv and Dnipro were lying in shelters or in corridors or in underground stations, listening to explosions getting closer and then further and then closer again, not knowing when or whether the all clear would come. Children clutching their parents, elderly people sitting on stairs, everyone in that specific state of suspended terror that only the people who have lived through sustained bombardment can truly understand. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described the attack as a completely transparent statement from Russia, saying that if Ukraine is not protected from ballistic and other missile strikes, these attacks will continue, framing the assault not as an isolated incident, but as a deliberate demonstration of intent. Zelensky is right, and the evidence supports him completely, because this attack did not come out of nowhere. It came after weeks of carefully telegraphed threats from the Kremlin. Just the week before, the Kremlin had publicly warned that it intended systematic strikes on targets in Kyiv in response to a drone attack on a dormitory in Ukraine's Russian-held region of Luhansk that killed 21 people, a strike that Ukraine denied carrying out. So Russia used a disputed attack, one Ukraine denies, as the public justification for launching one of the largest aerial bombardments in the history of this conflict, targeting a capital city of 3 million people with 73 missiles and 656 drones. That is the logic of terror dressed up in the language of retaliation, and it is important to name it clearly. Now let us zoom out and look at the broader strategic picture, because understanding why Russia launched this attack on this particular night requires understanding what has been happening on the battlefield in the weeks and months leading up to it, and the picture that emerges from that analysis is one that the Kremlin desperately does not want the world to see. According to the Institute for the Study of Wars assessment published on June 1, 2026, Ukrainian forces have largely halted Russia's spring-summer 2026 offensive, with Russian forces in May 2026 gaining control of only a fraction of the territory they captured in previous comparable periods, and multiple analytical organizations using different methodologies are all recording the same slow Russian rate of advance, a decline that appears to be the result of comprehensive battlefield shifts rather than seasonal weather factors. This is the strategic context that Putin is operating in when he orders 729 weapons fired at Ukrainian cities in a single night. He is not doing it from a position of strength. He is doing it from a position of mounting desperation because his armies are stalling, his casualty figures are catastrophic, and his economic advisors are warning him in increasingly urgent terms that the war is becoming financially unsustainable. Ukrainian defense sources report that the total combat losses of Russian forces from February 24, 2022 through June 2, 2026 have reached approximately 1,366,910 personnel, with 1,440 Russian troops killed in just the single day preceding the June 2 attack. Nearly 1.5 million Russian soldiers killed, wounded, or captured in 4 years of war. That is a staggering human cost that Vladimir Putin has chosen to pay in pursuit of a war that by every objective military measure is not going according to any plan his generals originally presented him. Despite increased warnings from economic officials about the unsustainable strain his war effort is putting on the Russian economy, Putin is reportedly resisting all pressure to reduce defense spending and end his war against Ukraine, a posture that analysts interpret as suggesting Putin still believes he can win in the near to medium term. But here is what makes this belief so dangerous. A leader who has already spent nearly 1.5 million of his country's fighting men, who has already burned through billions of dollars in weapons and fuel and equipment, who is being warned by his own economists that the financial system is beginning to buckle under the weight of permanent wartime spending, but who still believes victory is within reach, is a leader who will authorize attacks like the one on June 2nd, not because they serve any coherent military strategy, but because they express the rage and the desperation of a man who cannot accept that he has already lost the version of this war he originally envisioned. President Zelensky, for his part, struck a defiant tone following the attack, stating that Ukrainian warriors now have the capability to reach Russian military logistics across virtually the entire depth of temporarily occupied territory, and that there are practically no safe roads left for the Russian occupier in the south and east of Ukraine, a direct reference to Ukraine's expanding long-range drone strike capabilities. This is the other side of the strategic equation that Russia's missile barrages are trying to answer. While Russia bombs Ukrainian cities from above, Ukraine has been conducting its own systematic campaign of deep strikes against Russian military infrastructure, supply lines, fuel depots, and oil refineries that is slowly but measurably degrading Russia's ability to sustain its frontline forces. Ukraine's defense forces struck 15 Russian oil refineries during the January through May 2026 period alone, contributing to a growing fuel crisis inside Russia that is beginning to affect both the civilian economy and the military's operational capacity. 15 oil refineries in 5 months. That is not a symbolic gesture. That is a systematic campaign of economic and logistical warfare designed to choke the Russian war machine at its source, and it is working, which is precisely why Russia is now escalating its own bombardment of Ukrainian cities to such an extreme degree, because the Kremlin cannot find a way to stop Ukrainian drones from reaching deep into Russian territory and destroying infrastructure that Putin needs to keep his war running. So instead, he is trying to terrorize the Ukrainian population into demanding an end to the conflict on terms favorable to Moscow. In March 2026, Ukrainian troops launched successful counterattacks that liberated most of the Russian-occupied areas of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, and UK intelligence reported on May 27th that the estimated death toll of Russian soldiers since the start of the full-scale invasion had reached 500,000, a number that represents a generational catastrophe for Russia's military manpower reserves. 500,000 Russian soldiers dead in a war that Putin originally told his generals would be over in 3 days. The distance between that original promise and the reality of June 2, 2026 is the distance between a lie and a nightmare, and the 17 Ukrainians who were killed in that overnight attack and the more than 100 who were wounded paid part of the price for that distance. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Sybiha, speaking after the attack, stated bluntly that Moscow is losing on the battlefield and no number of missiles can change this reality, while simultaneously calling on Ukraine's international partners to act rather than merely condemn, specifically urging partners to unlock more European funding for NATO's Pearl program to obtain more Patriot and other anti-missile defense systems, increase investment in Ukraine's own long-range strike capabilities, ramp up sanctions pressure on Russia, and accelerate Ukraine's EU membership negotiations. These are not the words of a country that is losing. These are the words of a country that is fighting with the rational clarity of a side that understands it can win if its partners maintain their nerve. And that is a message worth amplifying in every capital from Washington to Brussels to Warsaw to Tokyo, because the stakes of this conflict extend far beyond the borders of Ukraine. Now let us talk about the weapons Russia used in this attack with a little more technical depth, because understanding the specific systems deployed on the night of June 2nd reveals something important about where Russia's military technology development is headed and what it means for the future of aerial warfare. Among the 73 missiles fired, Russia deployed 8 Zircon hypersonic cruise missiles, 33 ballistic missiles of various types, along with Kaliber cruise missiles and other systems, representing a deliberate mix designed to challenge different layers of Ukraine's multi-tiered air defense architecture simultaneously. The Zircon is particularly important to understand in this context. It is not just fast, it's maneuverable at hypersonic speeds, which means that unlike older ballistic missiles whose trajectories can be calculated and intercepted, the Zircon can alter its flight path at speeds that make interception extremely difficult.
Terminal interception extraordinarily difficult with current-generation interceptor missiles, and by deploying 8 of them in a single salvo, Russia was essentially using them as door openers, weapons designed not necessarily to hit specific targets themselves, but to force Ukrainian air defense radars and command systems to track and respond to them, consuming processing capacity and interceptor missiles that might otherwise be used against the slower, more interceptable ballistic missiles and cruise missiles following close behind in the same wave. This is layered aerial assault doctrine at its most sophisticated, and it reflects years of operational learning from previous strikes.
Russia has been watching how Ukraine's air defenses respond to each attack, identifying the seams and gaps, and gradually optimizing its attack profiles to maximize the number of weapons that penetrate to their targets. And the results, on the morning of June 2, 2026, 38 confirmed impact locations showed that the optimization is working to a degree that should alarm every NATO defense planner watching from the outside. Just a week before the June 2nd attack, on May 24th, Russia had already demonstrated this doctrine with a similarly massive strike involving 90 missiles and 600 drones that included an Hypersonic hypersonic ballistic missile, a weapon capable of carrying a nuclear warhead and only used 3 times in the entire war, that struck Bielotserkva, a city approximately 50 miles south of Kyiv, while Kyiv Mayor Klitschko reported damage in every single district of the capital city during that attack. 2 massive attacks within 10 days, May 24th and June 2nd, which means that within 10 days, Russia fired approximately 163 missiles and 1,256 drones at Ukraine in just 2 overnight operations. And this tempo of attack is not something that any country, no matter how determined, no matter how brave, can sustain indefinitely without the kind of comprehensive air defense coverage that requires a level of international support that Ukraine's partners have not yet fully delivered. Russia's defense order for various types of Shahed drones for the year 2026 amounts to more than 100,000 units, meaning that the supply of attack drones available to the Russian military for this campaign is effectively unlimited within any planning horizon that matters for the immediate future of this conflict. 100,000 drones in a single year's production order. That is a number that fundamentally changes the calculus of this war, because it means that no matter how many drones Ukraine's air defenses shoot down in any given night, Russia can simply reload and send another wave tomorrow night, and the night after that, and the night after that, until either Ukraine runs out of interceptor missiles or Russia runs out of political will to keep paying the financial and reputational cost of targeting residential buildings across a sovereign European nation. And this is ultimately what this conflict has become. It is a test of industrial capacity and political will on both sides. And on Russia's side, Putin has made his choice absolutely clear. He will spend whatever it costs, accept whatever casualties his military sustains, absorb whatever economic damage the sanctions impose, and fire whatever weapons he has available. Because in his calculation, the alternative, accepting that Ukraine will remain a sovereign, westward-leaning, NATO-aligned state on his border, is worse than any of those costs. The question that the world must answer, watching the smoke rise over Kyiv and Dnipro on the morning of June 2, 2026, is whether the democracies that claim to support Ukraine's right to exist are willing to provide the military capabilities, the Patriot batteries, the long-range missiles, the fighter jets, the interceptor stockpiles, that would make attacks like this one prohibitively expensive for Russia to launch, or whether they will continue to provide just enough support to keep Ukraine fighting without ever providing enough to allow Ukraine to win decisively. Because that middle path, that strategy of calibrated support designed to avoid escalation rather than achieve victory, is not a strategy that leads to peace. It is a strategy that leads to more nights like June 2nd, more apartment buildings collapsing in Dnipro, more windows blown out in Kyiv, more children injured in Kharkiv, more families like Olena Dniprovska's standing in the wreckage of everything they owned, asking themselves how much longer this can possibly go on. And the honest answer, the answer that every Western defense minister and foreign policy advisor knows but rarely says out loud, is that it will go on as long as Putin believes he can outlast the West's commitment to Ukraine. And the only way to change that calculation is to make the cost of continuing this war so catastrophically high that even Putin's capacity for denial cannot absorb it. And right now, looking at what happened on June 2, 2026, that threshold has not yet been reached, which means the war continues. The drones keep flying, the missiles keep falling, and somewhere in Ukraine tonight, another family is lying in a shelter listening to the sky above them turn into hell, waiting to find out whether they will wake up in the morning.